Today on LawNext, around the world in 40 days, the legal tech world, that is. Earlier this year, my guest Dera and Nevin traveled to 19 destinations in 15 countries and 6 continents over 40 days, meeting with legal hackers and legal entrepreneurs all over the world. We'll find out why she went, what she learned, talk about a few other topics as well, I hope. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that highlights the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law.
We'll get to today's interview in just a moment, but first, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, on to this week's interview.
Dera and Nevin, welcome to LawNext.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Really thrilled to have you here. Your career has primarily been in e-discovery. I think it's fair to say. Most recently, you were e-discovery counsel at Proskauer Rose in New York. Before that, you were managing counsel for e-discovery at TD Bank Group in Toronto. And before that, you practiced as an e-discovery lawyer at several firms. But then in March, you took a turn. You took on the title of Global Ambassador for Legal Technology and embarked on a world tour. How did you come to do that, and what were your objectives in doing it?
Okay, so I think to explain the world tour, let me take a step back. So I know that I'm most commonly associated with e-discovery because as a young lawyer and as a practicing litigator, that was the first place, apart from legal research, that the widespread adoption of technology and of advanced technology really made inroads into practice. And so because I've always had a fascination with technology and because I had a technology career before going to law school, that was just a natural point of entry for me into exploring how law and technology intersected both in the evolution of law and in service delivery and the business of law issues. So even though I've been e-discovery counsel, a lot of what I've been doing over the past 10 years is really helping the law firms and organizations I've been working with implement technology within the practice stack. And what I mean by the practice stack is that bundle of technologies that lawyers experience on their desktop that help them find law, make legal deliverables. So that's what I mean by the practice stack. So e-discovery has been one component of that and a very important component of that, but I've been involved in transactional work and a variety of other practice disciplines. In March of this year, so as I was at my fourth firm implementing practice technology throughout the stack, I wanted to take a step back and do a bit more of a global thinking process about where my career was going, the evolution of my career, and also just the evolution of trends. So I planned to take a 6-month sabbatical that also coincided with my desire to do something a little bit more academic, do a deep read, and take a break because I was feeling a bit burnt out. After I had made the announcement that I was going to leave Proskauer, the organizers of the Global Legal Hackathon came to me and said, well, since you're going to be taking a bit of time off, would you be interested in this global tour? And that was consistent with my desire to take a step back, understand global trends in legal technology. And so that was a bit of an opportunistic play on both of our parts. So opportunity meets need, and off I went on this global tour.
What were your objectives? Why did you want to do this? What was the purpose of the tour?
Yeah, so there's 2 different purposes. The organizers of the Global Legal Hackathon were interested in really extending the conversation about the Global Legal Hackathon and about the organization that was underwriting this, which is Integra Ledger. So they were using it primarily for marketing purposes. And so a lot of the interviews that I did were really intended to drive in each of those local communities, but also around the world, interest in the Global Legal Hackathon and some of the organizational sponsors of that event. And I had that interest as well in speaking to those people. But my broader interest was in a very short period of time, talking to as many participants in this so-called legal innovation community around the world, it's a wonderful opportunity to do, both a wide and deep set of research all at once. So I wanted to just see what's happening in all of these communities. Who are these people? What are they doing? What problems are they solving? What tools are available to them? What's the interest in their community in this evolution? And can we make connections between participants around the world, extend the conversation, deepen the analysis? And so I just had a curiosity going in as to why are all these people participating in this hackathon, and does this reflect something global? Are we solving the same problems? Is there duplication? Where are the obstacles? Where are the opportunities? And that animated my travel plans, and it also animated what I did on the ground. So in addition to speaking with participants in the Global Legal Hackathon, when I was in those communities, I tried to speak to as many people as I could who were available, and just did research and took a lot of notes and did a lot of listening.
You were live tweeting a lot of it. You were writing post on LinkedIn from some of it. I know you were lugging around a video camera of some sort and shooting video as you were going. If I've got this right, you hit. Let me rattle off this list. You got Melbourne, Shanghai, Singapore, Dubai, Budapest, Ukraine, Bucharest, Berlin, Stockholm, London, Cairo, Johannesburg, 2 cities in Brazil, Vancouver and Toronto in Canada, and here in the U.S., San Francisco, Seattle, and L.A. I may have missed some there, and I know there were some that you had wanted to get to that you didn't get to, including Lagos, Nigeria. But out of all those destinations, I'm not going to ask you what your favorite were, but were there any that most surprised you in terms of from the legal technology point of view, not from the world traveler point of view, in terms of what they were doing, the projects they were doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of places that are particularly notable for me, and I'm going to single out the communities in Brazil, and I'm going to single out what I saw in China. So the communities in Brazil, and I did hit 2, and there's a lot happening in South America. And so, my regret was I didn't have another 40 days to hit even more cities. I was very much impressed in both cities I went to in Brazil by a number of things. One was the integrated focus of industry, bar associations, the judiciary, and the law community, as well as just what I'm going to call ordinary civilians, in working together and their degree of organization. So even when they put on the events, the way the communities came together, I think, reflected a conversation that's already going on in Brazil. And Brazil has spent a lot of effort in funding the STEM communities and trying to make sure that it's a well-educated workforce that's able to support some of the modernization initiatives that society is implementing. So when I got to the ground, not only was my tour very well organized just from a practical and host perspective, but I was also impressed by the range of people who were already a part of the conversation about what's happening with legal technology and legal infrastructure modernization in Brazil. So that was a wonderful surprise. And I think not a lot of people may be aware of how active the community is in thinking through how that legal infrastructure is going to evolve. So that was a very interesting surprise.
What are the issues in Brazil? What were the issues you're looking at and talking about?
It's actually not dissimilar to everywhere around the world. So, digitization, right? Getting the legal infrastructure into the digital age is a major preoccupation of people in Brazil. Getting funding to adequately fund legal infrastructure and the development of legal technology is a part of that conversation. Modernization and skills training. So how do you take lawyers and law students and make sure that they can use the available technologies, navigate digital infrastructure, and keep abreast of the changes in laws? So they really see it, each of those 3 things, as requiring focus. And then how do you get those communities working together? And so Brazil is doing this in a number of different verticals. It's doing this in banking. It's doing this in mining. It's trying to develop these clusters of expertise. And the legal community is trying to participate in this conversation about modernization. So when I was in Belo Horizonte, which is a very large city, sort of partway between Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, they have a number of labs and incubators and accelerators. And among the verticals that they're trying to work with is the legal vertical, right? So they already have a number of different verticals like mining and industry and banking associated with these government-funded, government-sponsored incubators and accelerators. And the legal vertical is trying to plug in to use that infrastructure that's there already. In the other city that I was in, which was Florianopolis, the Bar Association, the judiciary are working together with industry, and there's a number of significant legal technology players in that community to have meetings and workshops to try and understand how the parties can work together effectively. So there's already a pretty remarkable community that's working in at least 2 different centers in Brazil, and it may be that that's replicated throughout the country. And that's important. And that's a little bit different than the way the conversation is shaping up, particularly here in the United States. And so I thought that was pretty distinctive.
Yeah.
The degree
China was
of
another one you said
collaboration and conversation.
Yeah. So Dera, another destination that you mentioned that was of interest to you was China. What did you see there?
Yeah. So I went to Shanghai and I spent a couple of days there. And before I went to Shanghai, I don't feel that I had a particularly good line of sight as to what was happening in that country and in that community. And I had a number of assumptions about, the role of legal infrastructure and the rule of law in China. My hosts were a pretty significant legal technology company called Bestone. And when I went into their operation, I have to say my mind was blown, not only by the degree of their hospitality and the tour that they gave, but just to realize that there is a company operating somewhere in the world that is taking calls from 23 million people a day and providing turnkey legal advice across 6 different legal sectors. That was mind-blowing. To my knowledge, there's nothing like that anywhere else in the world. So I thought that was quite remarkable.
It's a private corporate. It's a private company, privately run.
It's a private company, and this also reflects some differences in the way that that the law is administered. Their biggest client is the government, but it's a civil system, right? So that we can think a lot about that, but it's a civil system, and through everything from matrimonial advice to a variety of different things that we would call the consumer market, this company is helping the government administer legal services and justice services. So, and it's all mobile, right? A lot of the way these consumers are accessing this company is through their mobile phones. So if somebody, for example, is contemplating obtaining a divorce, which is possible under Chinese law, they can, using their mobile phone, get information about the procedure, the filings, and what the likely outcome is based on their particular circumstances, which is quite remarkable, right? Which is quite remarkable. And if they start the process of filing, they can call, and Bestone has help centers throughout the country that can take that call and help the individual resolve whatever step in the proceeding they're working through. And those call centers are staffed by lawyers. So I thought that was a pretty remarkable business model and a pretty remarkable use of technology to deliver those services to ordinary people. So that's what I saw. That was basically the first thing I saw when I went to China. The other thing that struck me is the nature of the development, because in many places, including in North America, we take for granted certain tools that are not available in China, right? So the idea of a Google search is not something that the average, Chinese developer can assume that its user base will have. And so they've been very inventive in the way they've selected and deployed technology, and they are significantly farther advanced in their use of AI across large data sets because they have large data sets in China. So those two things were quite eye-opening to me and made me realize that there's different ways we can frame the conversation about what's possible.
I don't think anybody has ever done what you did here, which is to kind of take this global tour of what's going on in legal technology. Certainly nobody I've ever heard of having done it. Did you find commonality among the different locations you went to? Are there global themes, common themes that you saw?
Yeah, I did. And that's why I wanted to go, is I wanted to see if I could pick up on global themes. My sense was, even when I was participating in the Global Legal Hackathon, that there was a lot of reinventing the wheel. And I wanted to understand if that was happening and why that was happening, right? So one of the questions that I had going in is, could we create a global incubator or a global accelerator to get people who might be working on similar projects working together? Because a significant challenge in the development of legal technology is the balkanization that results from so many different jurisdictions and so many different iterations of law, right? So balkanization is a big problem in this area anyway. But there are three broad categories that I'm going to talk about, and I'm still trying to figure out how to organize these categories. But one thing that really struck me is the number of people within the Global Legal Hackathon that really focused on what I'm going to describe as some sort of legal marketplace or legal aggregation problem. And so a very significant number of the teams were working on what I'd roughly describe as legal marketplace problems. So in America, we can think of things like Avo as an example of a legal marketplace solution. So particularly in Eastern Europe, in both the Ukraine and Romania, the winning teams or leading teams were working on legal marketplaces or legal aggregators. Same thing with South Africa, same thing with Sweden. In the Middle East, there's a significant interest in working on legal marketplaces and legal aggregators. And at first I thought, why is this happening? But it made me realize that a legal marketplace is really one of the first steps that technology can come to bear. Even when I think of the very celebrated offering from Melbourne, which is a product called Annika, it is, in a sense, an adaptation of a legal marketplace type of solution. So what's happening in Melbourne is that a group... Yeah, the helicopter. Yeah, this is welcome to New York City. So even if we look at the very celebrated product that is emerging from the team in Melbourne, and that's a product called Annika, which is justifiably celebrated. What that team is doing is they've identified an available pool of resources, which is law students, and an available pool of people needing legal services, which in Australia are people in quite remote communities. They're developing a technological mechanism to connect the people in remote communities with legal students to help them get some legal advice, right? So I think that's great. We all know of the history of Australia and, a lot of the school systems that were developed using modern technology, such as airplanes and televisions and radio. So it's very much in the spirit of a lot of the innovation that's happened in Australia in terms of delivering public services. But what all of the legal marketplaces and legal aggregators and even the solution like Annika raises for me when I step back, right? And the legal marketplaces are very important because people in South Africa said people don't know how to find a lawyer. The people in Romania said lawyers don't know how to find customers. Like, this is a very real problem. But what this means to me is that there's a systematic breakdown at the structural level of the marketplace, right? That's what's going on, is that people who need services and people who want to deliver services can't find each other. So this is really a consumer issue. I mean, this happens to a lesser extent on the corporate side, and that's why we have all of these legal directories. But there's something fundamental about the way law is being organized around the world, that people can't even find a lawyer even when they have the money to pay. So there's something structural going on there that I think benefits not just from technological intervention, but from a deep think and a conversation about, is this appropriate within our legal infrastructure, that people can't find these services, that they don't have the understanding to ask the questions they need to find the people that they need to find, or there's restrictions on advertising which are prohibiting lawyers from actually reaching out to consumers. So this is going to get to one of the themes that I think you and I might talk about is, in addition to technological offerings and bringing technology to bear, there's a missing step in the conversation, which is the political conversation about what kind of society do we live in and what's going to be the role and of legal infrastructure and the rule of law in facilitating that society. So that's the piece in innovation conversation that I think is missing. And that's what the legal marketplace is sort of raised for me at a philosophical or structural level.
Something beyond the regulation level. I mean, in the United States, obviously, regulation of lawyers is a big obstacle to facilitating those kinds of marketplaces or those kinds of the communication between the potential clients and lawyers who can help them. You're talking about something beyond even the regulatory structure?
That's right. And I think, in legal marketplaces, we can certainly see in the United States that regulation, particularly around attorney advertising, is a significant barrier to really changing the way that marketplace operates. But the next thing I observe, I think, might illustrate my point that there's a different conversation that's missing a little bit better. So a number of other teams were working on what I'm going to call just digitization initiatives or things related to the transformation that every sector of our society is going through, which is really digitization, moving from an analog world into a digital world, or from paper as a technology to communication facilitated by computing technology, right? The whole world is going through this in one way or another. And so a number of these technological solutions were really just addressing digitization failures, systematic digitization failures. And so there's two in particular that I'm going to talk about. And this is, I make a connection between LA and Lagos, that teams there were really addressing the same problem. So in Lagos, the team that won, Team Lemon, is addressing the problem of really computing the length of time that somebody needs to stay in prison. So apparently a really big problem is that once people go through the criminal system and get sentenced to incarceration, often let's say they're sentenced to 2 years. They'll serve their 2 years and then they may serve another 2 or 3 years because nobody can track down the record that has their release date, because the system is so large and so convoluted and so paper-based that record is not available. And of course, the prison doesn't want to make a mistake and let the person out if they don't know when the release date is. So these people can stay in jail past the release date because of an information gap that is a function of a lack of available information, largely a digitization failure. And so if you think about that's incredible. And so what they're doing is they're creating a device that the family of the incarcerated person can basically put a calendar date on their phone so that they know and they can develop the paper trail to be able to go at the end of the prison term to say, no, this person in our family actually should be released, which is remarkable, right? It's a great idea that solves a very particular problem, but it's actually remarkable. The underlying issue is a digitization failure. Similarly, the team in LA was dealing with expunging records associated with simple possession of marijuana. So again, there's laws on the books that permit people who have served sentences relating to simple possession of marijuana to obtain an expungement of their criminal record in certain situations. And so it's a technological solution to facilitate that. There is a law on the books apparently that provides for the automatic expungement upon certain conditions being met. But again, the failure of the infrastructure to digitize means that can't happen automatically. So arguably, if all of these records were digitized, there could be a pretty simple algorithm implemented to do this automatically, which the law provides for. But because the records aren't digital, often there's an application process and hunting down paperwork, and there's a whole process to go through to make sure that the record is expunged. So both of these are very similar in that it relates to a lack of government funding and a lack of political will to bring our legal infrastructure into the digital age in a systematic and calculated way.
Which is a very pervasive problem in the United States as well, and raises a whole host of other issues, including just data standardization among different court systems, and data collection and data availability. That question, right, is technology can solve that question once we've scoped it out. And so a lot of these solutions are operating on a micro level,
but it points to a larger pervasive problem that even quite beyond how you regulate lawyers, a lot of the needed information is not available in a digital format. So there's certain structural barriers to really implementing a lot of systemic solutions to a lot of these pervasive problems. So instead of having a conversation about how should justice be funded in this country, we're having solutions at the efficiency level of how do we deal with work on a particular desk to make an individual lawyer efficient. And I agree that that's an important part of the conversation. But what's lacking from a lot of the innovation conversation is the structural issue of, okay, once we get lawyers to be pretty efficient in the way that they work, or once we train them on how to use Word, we still need to file paper with the court, right? And it's not always searchable. Or as you say, there's no taxonomy of how this information is put in, so we can't even get good statistics to make evidence-based decisions about the value of the investments. And so,
right. But it's even an access to law issue. I mean, we still have problems with accessing what courts are doing because we don't have that information available digitally or easily available digitally.
That's right. So we have, and that's a very important distinction, is we have an access to justice problem. We also have an access to law problem. And so that's why I've highlighted these two things, is that there's digitization failures and legal marketplace failures, which exist beyond the regulation phase. And so while we should look to our regulators to make sure that the bar is appropriately regulated, there's actually structural problems that perhaps the bar or legal technologists need to deal with and engage with at the political level in each country to make sure that we have the justice system that is appropriate to our country. And it's more than just a rule of law issue. It's about a legal infrastructure issue. And arguably, not enough work is being done to bring legal infrastructure into the 21st century globally. And so this is just going to compound any access to justice problem that continues to exist.
So what was the third broad category?
The third thing? So the third broad category is where these teams are harnessing technology to focus on specific business challenges, right? Which I think is really the focus of a particular hackathon, is what business problems can we identify, and can we identify a technology that is appropriate to that business solution? So this is what I'm going to call the vanilla legal technology type of work that a lot of people are talking about. So you get into design thinking, you get into empathy for the consumer and all of this kind of stuff, and then you choose the appropriate technology, iterate, a design, and then build it up. So there's a number of products that I saw that fit squarely into that category that were really quite remarkable. And then it's just a question of, from a business perspective, how are they solving the problem in a way that is commercial, that can be commercialized? And so there were a number of very interesting technological solutions focusing on interesting business problems that I saw. So there were a few that won awards, and I'll just mention those. One was Reveal You out of Hungary. And Hungary is, of course, subject to GDPR, and this idea was originated before the implementation of GDPR. But it's a mobile device that lets a consumer ask, a major organization, for example, Facebook or Google, what information do you have about me, pursuant to the GDPR process. So I thought that was very interesting, because they've looked at a very specific business issue, which is the right to be informed under the GDPR about what personal information a company has about you. My own personal view on that, and I've expressed that to the team, is you're really solving for the wrong problem. Is, yes, the consumer needs a mechanism to ask the company, but the company needs a way to deal with all these consumer requests at scale and in an organized way. And that's really your market. But they were very focused on the consumer dimension of that. Another thing that I thought was really kind of interesting was a product called Apresentese out of Florianopolis, Brazil. And this product was inspired by a judge from the Amazonia region that said a very significant problem they're having in Amazonia is that they've got a lot of members of their prison population that actually have quite minor sentences that could serve these in the community or could be eligible for early release, but there is not enough infrastructure around parole to allow these persons to be released. So if there was some sort of technological solution for this, that would be helpful. And so the team around Appresente say, we're looking at using GPS coordinate tracking and a variety of other technological and security mechanisms to allow people who had been sentenced for minor infractions to be released into the community and to have parole through a series of check-in mechanisms rather than an ankle bracelet to permit the judges and parole infrastructure to monitor these people released into the community, but also to help them integrate back into their communities in a way that wouldn't impair their ability to spend time with their family or regain employment or otherwise participate in life. So in a way, looking at the dignity of those people that were serving their sentences in the community to make sure that they could participate and perhaps reduce the likelihood that they would need to return to prison. So I thought that was interesting. And then another team that I thought was doing some very interesting work was out of Seattle. And I'll just describe what this product did. It didn't actually make it through the second and third rounds, but they had developed a mechanism to take body cam photographs, for example, from police officers, encrypt it and load it onto a blockchain. So nobody could see it, but the fact that the body cam information was there would be available on the blockchain. So apparently when there's an incident, a lot of the time rights groups want access to this information, but the police don't want to give them access to the information because it could impair an ongoing investigation. But the rights groups want access to it because they want proof that the information hasn't been tampered with. So this solution that this team was developing would allow for the body cam information to be uploaded, maintaining evidentiary integrity, right? So that the rights groups would know nobody had tampered with it, but permitting the investigation of the incident to unfold without compromising it. And so striking a balance between all of those interests. So I thought, again, that was an interesting idea about turning to blockchain to maybe find a different way of navigating those competing interests. So I thought that was also interesting. And again, was the identification of a specific problem and identifying a technology that might be able to bring to bear some solutions on that. So I guess all of those are really looking for business models, but I thought those were very interesting entries into the hackathon competition.
We'll get back to my interviews in just a moment. But first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, let's continue this week's interview.
So at one point during your trip, you wrote a post talking about a conversation you had with a man on a train on the way to Budapest, and he was asking you how long you'd be in Budapest, and you said, well, I'm just going to be there 24 hours, and he didn't seem too approving of that. But you wrote that, I'm going to quote you right here. You said, I'm nowhere long enough to really understand what the local community is facing. At best, my visit can serve as a spark or a catalyst, some small event that connects that community to another within a global network. So I want to ask you now, as you look back, do you think that this trip was a catalyst, or what follow-up are you doing or others doing to make that catalyst happen?
Yeah, so as I was going through the trip, I was connecting people that I was hearing were talking about very similar things. So as I was going through, I was trying to do that work. My hope on the tour was really that the organizers of the Global Legal Hackathon would erect some infrastructure to maybe formalize that particular global network. And I know that they have the intention to do the competition again, but that global infrastructure of connecting all of these communities together remains aspirational, right? So I'm doing a little bit of this work with the book that I'm writing, but again, that's a bit more passive. There really isn't a global network where people can share information and pool information. And that's unfortunate because when I went to specific communities, and I'll just cite two, although this happened in every single community. China wants to be better connected to the world. When I was in South Africa, they were basically saying, we are desperate for formal mentorship. We are desperate for a legal incubator here. We are desperate for a legal accelerator here and access to capital. Same thing with Egypt. The thing I heard over and over again is, we are so interested in participating in the community, but none of the information is ever translated into Arabic. So it takes us a long time to understand what the rest of the world is talking about. So there are very few resources available to those communities about blockchain or AI that are written in Arabic. And so the people who can read in English and translate, it just takes them a long time and they feel constantly overwhelmed and behind. So some of the networks are very well established. So the network between the US and Canada, the network between the US and Australia, or between the UK and Australia, are very well established. And it seems to me that there's still a lot of work to be done to bring together other places in the world to enable participants in the world to understand that that there's a lot of great ideas about there, and the cross-pollination may accelerate a lot of thinking and development.
What about this concept of the... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But, I'm not aware of any organization that's specifically pulling things together. So I know ILTA's doing a little bit, but it really doesn't have a presence in many of the places in the world where I heard from people on the ground, we want to be connected to the broader global community.
Yeah. What about the hackathon concept itself? This was an ambitious project to organize and pull off this global legal hackathon. There was a wonderful burst of energy around it, a lot of people talking about it. Clearly, a lot of teams got involved in it. But does it end up being just a flash in the pan and we all move on and kind of forget about it? What happens with everything that went into these various projects around the country? A lot of these people might have had great ideas, but they may not have the money to bring them to market or develop them. Others may not have been marketable in the first place. I don't know. Yeah. But what do you think comes out of that effort over the longer term?
Yeah. So, I'm of two minds about this. I've had some skepticism generally about hackathons as opposed to legal hacking. So I'm a very big proponent of legal hacking. But I've had some skepticism about hackathons because I've gone to hackathons where people talk a lot about ideas. There's a PowerPoint made at the end. There's no minimally viable product. Nobody's done any market scoping or anything else like that. Everybody does the PowerPoint. We eat pizza and then everybody goes home. And I say, okay, that's interesting, but what do we do about that? So it can be helpful as a community building exercise, but I'm not sure that hackathons generally move the needle on really doing the work that needs to be done to improve access to justice or to improve even legal outcomes or even just legal service delivery. So I've had some skepticism about these events generally. The Global Legal Hackathon, I thought, distinguished itself both by the scope of its ambition and by the judging rubric. So I thought that this hackathon had actually set a pretty interesting judging rubric, although I went into it still with some skepticism about, is anything actually going to happen with this hackathon? Because unless we make a concerted effort to bring technologists, designers, business professionals to the table, I'm not sure that we're going to get anything other than PowerPoints, which is articulations of ideas. When I went to the New York edition of the hackathon as an observer and I started to follow the Twitter feed, I was struck by the ambition of a lot of the teams. And there's an excitement about participating in something that is global. So I thought that the organizers of the hackathon did a great job in finding communities and bringing them to the table and getting people to feel like they were part of a global phenomenon. And if the hackathon had no outcome other than that, I still think it's incredibly valuable. Where I think the hackathon organizers, they didn't anticipate that this many people would come to the table. And so there wasn't that kind of infrastructure available to support these teams beyond the competition. And that's one of the things that I was sent out to do, is to say, okay, what is actually needed, right? And I brought all that information back to the organizers. And so now I imagine that they're sitting around and thinking about it. But part of the challenge with a hackathon is because it's really connected to an organization that is very invested in creating a legal blockchain, a lot of these particular teams don't have anything to do with blockchain. So it's unclear how they fit into that ecosystem of the sponsoring company. And it's made me realize that there are gaps within the global community of community building, dissemination, knowledge sharing. And it's not clear to me what organization is best placed to pick up that work.
Dera, you mentioned earlier that you're working on a book now. I assume this is a book based in part on your experiences in these travels, if not entirely. What are you writing about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The idea of the book was actually generated at Codex 2017 when I was speaking on a panel moderated by Dan Katz about AI in the law. And so, Dan Lear has been on me for a long time to say, you need to write down a lot of your observations about the use of advanced technology in the law as a book. So I had planned to take a bit of time off to start to ink that out. But when I went on the global tour, the things that I saw on the global tour basically supplanted my interest in writing that book about the use of AI in law. And so over the summer, I've been writing this book about my travels around the world. And just last week, I took a step back and read it, and I realized it's really two books. One is a more lighthearted, this is where I went, and here's some travel hacks, and here's all the things that I saw part of the book. And the other part of the book is a really digging deep into what I saw in each of those communities. I currently have it laid out by writing about each community separately. So what happened when I went to Melbourne? What happened when I went to Shanghai? What happened when I went to Kyiv, right? So that's the way it's currently organized. As I read it, I realized it needs a pretty substantial re-edit to pull forward these themes. And where I'm at in my evolution of the book is trying to say, okay, am I going to go in and really look at data and make this a data-driven type of exercise to pull out some of the specific challenges that are happening around the world? Or is this going to be a bit more of a philosophical take on here's where we are at as an industry of people interested in the evolution of legal infrastructure and access to justice, and what are the sort of larger scale challenges that we need to start wrapping our head around? So that's where I am. I'm taking this week off to think about that, and then I'll dive back into the rewrite.
So what have been what's the big lessons for you about innovation in law? I mean, what have you learned? What do you see as perhaps the biggest obstacles to innovation in law based on what you've seen and learned over the past year?
Yeah, so my take is a bit unorthodox, right? So when I really take a step back, and most people have probably seen that I've been absent from the conversation or from the community for the past few months, and it's really because I am taking this sabbatical, but this step back has been very helpful.
Well, but you've been writing still.
Yeah, I've been writing, but I really stopped in June. Like I've been really trying to take a sabbatical. I've been not as successful in taking my sabbatical as I was hoping, but I really have been trying to take a sabbatical.
Yeah.
People keep on calling me and saying, can you do work for me? Can you interview with us? Can you do all of this kind of stuff? So I haven't been quite as successful in stepping back as I wanted to. But what strikes me about a lot of the conversation, in addition to it being very echo chambery, is that it's operating at too micro a level, right? There's a lot of reinvention of the wheel. And the thing that strikes me the most is that as a group of people working on innovation, we don't have a clear understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And we don't have a consistent understanding of innovation. So people are confusing innovation as a verb, innovation as a noun. People aren't distinguishing between innovation and invention. People aren't distinguishing between innovation and change. And if you step back and read the innovation literature, so as I've been trying to do over the summer, so I've been taking a self-directed reading class in the study of innovation, because there really is such a thing. That branch, that discipline actually has remarkably precise definitions about innovation versus invention, innovation versus change. And the legal community would benefit from looking at that literature to help us be more precise in our communications. So I know a lot of people like Dan Lina are trying to develop metrics and data around this, but first becoming consistent in the way we use words is going to be very helpful. And that's what struck me is we're a whole community of lawyers. I mean, words are our stock in trade, and yet we're using a lot of these words in a very slippery way. And what that's leading to in this sector is two things: a huge balkanization of efforts and a huge range of charlatanism in the industry. So both of those things are pervasive. And I think the balkanization and the charlatanism are fueled by a tremendous amount of cheap money coming into the space and funding any old thing, regardless of whether there's a real business plan or a real need. And there's a lot of not smart money coming into the space, which is increasing the amount of charlatanism in the space. So that's my step back that I've observed and has largely informed the teaching that I've done over the summer to help people understand that innovation has some specific characteristics. Another thing that I think we need to talk about is the bias of the community is that innovation is largely going to occur through technology. So in our culture generally, our culture is associating innovation with technological transformation. And I understand why, because that's what's happening in the world. But if we stop and think about it, law itself is a technology, right? Law itself is a kind of societal technology. And lawyers are actually innovators by trade. Lawyers innovate all the time. A lot of the time, litigators are just doing incremental innovation. And that's what the evolution of case law is about. But sometimes there's transformational innovation, which is, a new statute which sets a different direction for law. So a lot of this conversation about lawyers not being able to innovate, I think, misses the point of what lawyers are for. Law is there to help people navigate the technology of the law and incrementally change it or wholesale change it when society needs a different type of technological layer on top of its organization, right? Law is there to help us deal with third parties and gain certainty in our affairs. So a lot of the conversation, I think, is unhelpful, and we can have lawyers participate in innovation by being more conscious of the way that lawyers are innovating as part of their stock and trade. That's not to say that law doesn't have to undergo a digital transformation. Like every other sector of the world, it does. But I think we need to be very clear, are we innovating in the law because society is changing? Are we bringing law into the digital world and, using digital technology as a way of innovating in the delivery of services? Are we innovating in the business model of how people organize themselves economically to participate in the lawmaking world? Are we innovating in legal infrastructure? That means in the institutions that have a role in creating and delivering our law. Or are we innovating in the business models associated with legal services delivery, which would involve a lot of the business transformation around risk management and efficiency that a lot of people are talking on? And we need to become very, very clear about that, because otherwise a lot of people are chasing, I call them chasing paper dragons, because they're not really clear what the point of their innovation is. And different people are going to have different stakes in how that innovation is unfolding. So I think the conversation just needs to be broadened a little bit so that we truly understand what's at stake. My own view is lawyers need to be laser focused on innovating in the law, because our society is undergoing such rapid transformation that if we don't have lawyers keeping track of what's happening in society, those technological transformations or those social transformations are going to become very quickly misaligned with risk management that we need as a society. And so if lawyers become too focused on just, are we going to start scanning stuff? They're missing the ball on some of the things that we really need lawyers to do, which is maintaining the legal infrastructure to help us respond to the changing conditions of the world.
I 100%
That's very philosophical, right?
Yeah, well, right. No, but right? I completely agree with you. We're gone over our time. I wanted to just ask one more quick question. I'm curious, on a personal level. I mean, you kind of pulled this whole thing together, this trip, very quickly in very short order, very short notice. You packed up a backpack and took off around the world on a real adventure. I mean, on a personal level, what did you take away from this? What did you learn maybe about yourself out of all of this?
Yeah. So, between the day that we decided to do this and me actually hopping on a plane to go to Vancouver, there were 13 days. And I think that's what people misunderstand. So I think a lot of people think that I quit my job to do this. No, I had talked to Proskauer about leaving my role and that had been in process for a while. And then because I had an end date, which was already in the calendar, which was March 9th. It made me suddenly available. So I decided to leave on March 11th. It made me realize that I am way more creative, way more resilient, and way more operationally capable than I even knew, right? I mean, I knew all of those things about myself, but this was just a different level, because in addition to just physically getting myself from location to location, I had to navigate culture very quickly. I had to navigate languages I didn't know. I had to make my trip as I was doing it and book all these interviews as I was doing it. I didn't have any experience operating a camera before I left. So on the plane from New York to Vancouver, I was reading the camera manuals and teaching myself how to use the camera. Right? I mean, all kinds of things. The early footage is not as accomplished as the later footage, but I got it done. And I think, it was helpful. Yeah, it was helpful actually, to get some of that lawyer characteristic of wanting everything to be at an A+ level. It helped me relax a little bit, because it was just not possible to do everything at an A+ level on this trip. So it made me a little bit more conscious of, where I can give things up a little bit more. So people who have worked with me will know that I'm very fastidious about details, and that was just not possible on this trip. But, more to the point is, I knew when I made the decision to leave Proskauer that I was going to be expanding my own personal focus to move beyond e-discovery into legal technology and into structural change. And this accelerated my understanding and my desire to make that career transformation for myself. So it was exactly the right thing to do at the right time. I learned a lot. I have amazing contacts throughout the world. And as I succeed in writing this book, I'm going to be helpful. I'm going to be excited to share all of this research and outcome that I've done. And hopefully this will catalyze a conversation about how participants around the world can work more closely and collaboratively together.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly look forward to reading the book. I should let listeners of this program know that if they go to your LinkedIn page, all of your articles that you posted during the trip and some of the articles and thoughts that you've posted since the trip are available there. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really, really, really appreciate your time and your thoughts, and really interesting conversation.
Great, Bob. Thank you so much for having me on your show and for all the work you do facilitating and catalyzing these conversations.
Well, that does it for today's show. If you like what you hear, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a comment there. Also, if you would like to send us a comment here, just record something on your mobile phone, record a comment and send it to info@lawnext.com, and we'll play some of your comments on the show from time to time. Thanks for listening. This is Bob Ambrogi, and this is LawNext.